for Earth Day, for the World Scholars Earth Day celebration. My name is John Smith. I'm going to be leading the discussions today, and we have three distinct topics that we're going to talk about. First one is going to be climate change and the impact that it has on the planet. The second topic is going to be pollution and ways that is affecting us that you might not think about. And the third topic is going to be some tips and tricks that you can do to conserve water, conserve energy, so on and so forth, that you probably also didn't think about. So without any further ado, let's get right into our first topic. So let me look up the script right now. There we go. All right, so one thing that a lot of the media has been talking about recently is how climate change has really been impacting the planet. And 2019 was the second warmest year on average, and that was an increase of 1.8 degrees higher than the averages throughout the entire 20th century. So that means that the climate is warming, and that has a lot of implications, not just that it's going to be hotter during the summer and we're going to have to drink more water. That really affects a lot of natural ecosystems, and it causes this thing that's called biome shift, where you have natural ecosystems where it gets used to a certain climate. When the climate changes because of increased greenhouse emissions, that causes it to really shift into a different thing. You might have a forest or flatlands that can begin to turn into a desert because primarily it's getting hotter and the soil also changes. And that's one of the topics that we actually learn about in environmental systems and societies. And Miss Luna is the teacher for that. I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that.
Thank you, Johnny. Yes, I do. With all of these climate changes that are taking place, our ecosystems can't keep up with those changes. That includes the animals and the plants. This last freeze that we had, it affected all of us, not only in our homes where we had frozen pipes, we didn't have electricity. Those are conveniences for us. The main thing that we need to focus on is how it affects our ecosystems. Here in the valley, we actually had a lot of organisms that died due to the increase of or decrease in temperature over a long period of time. We had a lot of fish in Brownsville. I don't know if any of you guys actually saw the news during that time frame, where they had a lot of the fish that died in the resacas. So they had the city workers actually using nets to remove the fish before they started creating a bigger problem with the water systems and the smell with them decomposing. Further up north, we had problems in those ecosystems where there was a lot of deer that died. We have a particular deer that's native to the area, the white-tailed deer, but we also have other exotic deer throughout Texas that people have introduced that are doing very well in Texas. One of those deers were the access deers. It looks like, the adult deer looks like Bambi. It has a bunch of white spots all over it. And there's a lot of social media pictures where they show truckloads of those access deer that had actually perished due to the freezing weather conditions. And a lot of those deers in those pictures, you can see that they were covered with snow all over the place. That also affects our plants. A lot of the plants, as you can see around your own home, a lot of the plants died. If they're Texas native plants, they weren't able to sustain those cold temperatures. If there were plants like evergreens that we planted because they look pretty and we bought them at Lowe's, at Home Depot, those plants probably were able to survive, but our Texas native plants did have a hard time with those temperatures.
And I think that that's a really important point about the plants, because a lot of that crop failure that can arise from a sudden change, like a sudden natural disaster, like a big freeze, that can result in a lot of food loss. And that might even threaten like whether or not somebody can eat and whether or not we can sustain ourselves within like a week or a month time frame. And also like when we have natural disasters that are linked to climate change, you also have a lot of people that kind of panic rush and buy a bunch of food from the supermarket, a bunch of water. We even saw that at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic with a bunch of people buying toilet paper. And I think as a society as a whole, we kind of take it for granted that these are finite resources and they're constantly in production. And if something bad happens, if a big disruption happens, or if we even cause the conditions on the planet to not allow something to be produced, it won't be produced. And we're just going to have to go without it. And that might be very detrimental
And I would
to.
like to add, if I can, Johnny, I know we talked about how it affects the environment and the planet, the plants, everything. However, it also has a great impact on humans. I know I did my extended essay on the psychological effects of climate change. And like Johnny said, a lot of climate related issues, maybe some, I don't know, they could be, if they're on a rise now, hurricanes, the winter freeze that we had, all of those could actually cause anxiety, depression, PTSD on a lot of our population, and that it has actually been a rise specifically in the United States population. And so it's always also good to bring awareness to how it affects the human beings too.
And I think you brought up one study where we were talking about this earlier. You brought up one study where mice that were subject to like pollution in the air, and I know this is kind of going a bit off topic, but they were subject to pollution and they showed signs of depression that humans typically show. And I found that really interesting
Really
because
interesting.
it's like, how does the quality of the air, like deep down in our psyche, impact our mood?
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about climate change, we always think like the bigger impact of it, like the scientific impact of it. We don't really think about the psychological part of that, and also how beautiful systems in the earth are being destroyed, like the polar ice caps. Like it's not good.
Definitely. And there's actually something else that I found in some research called climate grief, talking about climate change. And so, people that are actually, very aware of the detrimental effects that are happening to the environment are actually the ones that are more prone to suffering from mental health issues. And even not, it's not only in the adults, but some of them also have children, and they also have these discussions with their children, and their children also suffer from climate grief. And it's actually a conference. I was talking to Johnny about this earlier. They have a conference, I'm not sure where, but it's here in the US, and it's called Climate Grief. And people who are worried about the environment go and grieve, like all their pain because of the environmental problems that we're having nowadays. So that's something that I found really interesting.
Definitely. And our time is actually about up for climate change. So does anyone else have anything they want to chime in about that? Any discoveries?
Something interesting as well to keep in mind is the Gulf Stream current. That is actually what's having those effects of those extreme climate changes. We are very reliant on that current for those temperature regulations between Europe, here, everywhere. And that is actually, that current is slowing down due to the climate change that is occurring.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
think I saw that it was like at the slowest speed in like the last 1,000 years or something like that.
Yes,
And if that stops, like that's going to basically change the entire face of the earth. Like it's going to be a completely different planet.
Right. The increase in temperature changes, of course, like as we've mentioned, causing the ice caps to melt, but that's changing the salinity in the ocean, which changes the ocean current.
And I think that that also impacts corals, if I'm not mistaken, and how like because of the pH levels of the ocean, they're not able to form the backbone that composes corals. And I'm sure there are many other oceanic species that are also being affected by this, like acidification of the oceans.
All right. Anything else before we move on to our next topic? Awesome. So our next topic is over pollution. And when I really thought about pollution, I thought about the our local impact of that, specifically with the Rio Grande. And I know that like the EPA doesn't regulate Mexico and what they can dump into rivers. And like on our side of the border, we have really specific regulations on like whether or not we can dump things like batteries, other waste, so on and so forth. But I've at least heard that there's a lot of dumping of kind of toxic chemicals and toxic objects into the Rio Grande, and that's our primary water supply. And I also read an article that identified the Rio Grande as a major factor in health along the border. And it really makes you think like that pollution isn't just making the planet like darker and warmer, it's also directly impacting our health and impacting the health of our pets, animals, natural people or natural ecosystems around us, and even the foods that we eat. Like one other thing that we talked a lot about in environmental science was the different types of pollution, and specifically how point source pollution can be very detrimental. And that's when you have one company or one other object that is releasing a bunch of contaminants into the environment. And one example that really struck with me was both the Minamata disease and the iti iti. Minamata is mercury poisoning that a lot of Japanese suffered from around the 1950s because there was a manufacturing company that dumped all their mercury into a local river. And it's very similar with the iti iti. That was cadmium poisoning from a mining company along, I believe, the Yangtze River. And just because we didn't really know much about like what these metals can do to the human body, we found out that the hard way. And it might seem common now that, oh, mercury poisoning, dumping that into a river, that's not a good idea. But it also makes me think like, what kind of things are we doing today, releasing into the environment today, that 50 years down the line we'll find out like really affected our health poorly.
And adding on that onto that, Johnny, some of the research that I was also done was putting a connection between air pollution and cognition and well-being. And Johnny mentioned the study, but I like noticed that California cities were actually in the top 10 most polluted cities in the United States. And so after learning about the mice study, um, the mice were actually I'm sorry, they were living in conditions with air pollutions, and so they would get the average amount of pollution that a normal human being, average human being would get. And so they developed the symptoms of depression. And so what I figured from that was that people living in California and the other top cities that are most polluted, and this is just talking about the United States, um, were actually more prone to suffering from depression. And that's actually something very scary because, you know, we focus a lot of on the environment, but also, like Johnny was mentioning, it has a very direct effect on human beings and our health too.
Going back to the Rio Grande River, I wanted to make sure that we understand our own river system. Our own river system starts all the way up in Colorado, goes through New Mexico, and then along our border for Texas. Now, this river water is actually very clean water when it starts. It's melted snow that makes its way in through the tributaries and then makes it a river. Now that water is actually very clean, but as that water is traveling from Colorado all the way down to us, it's picking up a lot of pollutants. So now we have organisms that are picking up those pollutions, and then we have the food web that's being affected. That's what we call biomagnification, where we have one organism eating another organism that has high levels of that toxin, and now it's being accumulated within those organisms at the top of the food chain. So by the time this water gets to us, this is our drinking water. Every single city in the Rio Grande Valley pumps its water out of the Rio Grande River. There's bigger cities that pump it out, and those bigger cities, like example, McAllen, will transfer that clean water and sell it to the smaller cities. So our main source is the Rio Grande Valley versus other cities further up north, like San Antonio, Austin, San Marcos. All those areas get their water from a groundwater source, the aquifers. They pump that water out of the aquifers and they use that to actually drink. So their water is much cleaner, and that's why when you go to those areas and you taste the water, it tastes sweeter than what we have down here. Sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but I know our water sometimes will have a fishy smell to it, or even sometimes smell like a canal water. Okay, so we do need to be very aware of what we're tossing out our windows through our car in the area where you're at during lunchtime. All those things will make their way into our water systems. As Johnny was mentioning, we have point source pollution and non-point source pollution. The point source pollution, we know exactly where that pollution is coming from, versus non-point source, we don't know where it's coming from. If you drive around anywhere through the Rio Grande Valley and you see those water ditches at the entrances or the overpass, you'll see that accumulation of trash, bottled waters. I've even seen soccer balls in there, all kinds of trash that people have thrown out the window on the street. It makes its way into the gutters and then into those drainage systems. And eventually that water does make its way into the Gulf Coast and into the Laguna Madre and into our oceans.
And the only way that we can really address the non-point source pollution, because it's from so many different places, is to really think about when we're littering and encourage other people in the community to not litter. Like you might think, oh, I'm just throwing out my gum, I'm just throwing out a water bottle. But if everybody does that, then you're going to have a massive problem. And you've probably already heard of this if you're watching the live stream, but the animals, especially the marine animals, if they get things like water bottles or even the things that like 6 packs of Gatorade or stuff like that come in, if they get that plastic around their necks, that can kill them. And you just don't really think about that when you're just throwing it out. But the long-term impact that can have when it all accumulates together in one place, that can destroy an entire ecosystem. And just think like if the entire South Padre Island ecosystem around the island, around the Laguna Madre, just think what if that got destroyed? Like Miss Luna was mentioning with the freeze when a lot of the fish died. Like what if they all went extinct in that area? That would be incredibly detrimental to our well-being and our living as people that live in the valley.
And speaking about how it affects the animals, and you were talking about plastic bottles and the 6 pack, the little plastic thing. Even now with the pandemic that we use masks, that's another thing. I've seen a lot of photos of birds with the mask around their, their feet. And so that's another thing that we should look out for. Don't, don't litter, especially now because of this.
Back to the water. One thing also to keep in mind, it's not only that it's the drinkable water, but also that water is used to water the agriculture. And so your fruits, vegetables, they're being watered with that polluted water. And so you're also ingesting very not healthy fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, you're totally right. And going back to what Johnny was saying about South Padre Island and like conserving the waters for especially tourism or things like that. I don't know if you guys recall, but around June of 2020, I remember that there was this accident in Acapulco, Mexico, where like drainage waters went into the ocean. And I feel like it showcases one of the repercussions of pollution and how it's not the first time and it won't be the last time where we see how the consequences of pollution actually impact tourism places, touristic places like Acapulco. And I think it's worth looking at so we can prevent future events like that, especially near us.
All right. We're about out of time for this topic, so does anyone else have anything they wanted to add? All right, so our final topic is regarding conservation and sustainability. And before we get into that, if anyone in chat is listening right now, and if you have any questions that maybe you want us to address after we're done with all the topics, just feel free to put that in chat and we can address those. So start thinking about any questions you have. But our next topic, or our final topic, I should say, is conservation and sustainability and some tips that we can do. And I think the way that I'm going to start this off is by sharing the thing that I really love to do to be a bit more sustainable in my home. So my mom and I have over the past year worked on planting a garden. And right now we have carrot plants, we have tomato plants, and before the freeze, we used to have a bunch of bell pepper plants, but unfortunately they all died off. We also had some lettuce and some green bell pepper plants, and luckily we were able to replant a lot of those, and our tomato plants are doing really well now. But it's really nice being able to just walk out into the garden, get some herbs, get some tomatoes, put that on a salad without having to drive to the store, without having to go through the overhead of having the packaging of where the fruits and vegetables come from, having it shipped out, so on and so forth. If you think about like the bigger impact of what it takes to get food, it really starts to make sense just having a local garden right in your house or maybe even in your community. I don't know. I don't think we have any local gardens in the valley, but maybe if there are any international or other people from the United States viewers listening right now, I think that it's a really awesome idea having a community garden where you can get some fruits and vegetables and have a salad or something like that. Does anyone else have any other tips they'd like to share?
Well, I think going back to like planting gardens, as you said, I think it's also a great alternative to avoid using plastic containers or buying things from the store, because it makes it more sustainable, and that way you don't have to be buying things that you could be growing at home. And not to say anything about how that's intrinsically good for your budget if you don't want to spend too much on things that you can be planning yourself. But I think it's also like a breath of fresh air for the earth, because it forces us to contribute positively to the environment, and the release of oxygen in your very like home atmosphere is also good for your health. So it's a win-win, I believe.
That's a great point, Julia. It does help the environment, but also, if you think about it, we're not using fossil fuels as of tractors to actually go and pick up those crops like the lettuce and the carrots and all that. You're doing it yourself, so you're actually not releasing of those toxic pollutions into the air. I know we also have a garden at home that we started. We used organic potting mixing soil instead of like Miracle Grow or anything like that. And these have natural components in it. That way it's not, again, we're not consuming those toxins. And at the same time, we're consuming all organic vegetables.
Yeah, of course. And then I think compost is also another thing, another subject that we were going to talk about. And I think also tying it in with the concept of waste and the waste that we produce in your home. I think it's a great way to get rid of that waste and also get something out of it. Through compost, we can also grow and help our plants. And not necessarily if you have plants that you can eat, but also like flowers that you may have as decoration in your home. I think that it's a great alternative for people who want to have a more sustainable lifestyle.
And of course, also making sure that, some of the stuff that you use day-to-day basis, try not to create an excess of. So for example, plastic water bottles, going back and having that refillable water bottle, going to the grocery store, making sure you have that bag that you can reuse instead of getting more plastic bags. And then, of course, if you do have those plastic bags, reuse them. I know that many of us at home do. And so things like that.
All right, and one thing that I wanted to bring up was food waste. And that's a big problem, especially in more developed countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, so on and so forth. Um, One of the big things that we can do to limit food waste, or actually, let me share the statistic first. About 25% of the world's food is wasted, and that equates to about 1 billion tons of food. And this is food that could be eaten. And there's a lot of people starving. There's 821 people that go starving or go hungry at least every single day. But we're wasting about 1 billion tons of food because to our standards and the society that we have, we say that it must be bad. Like we can part with it because we have enough funds, we have enough money, and we've developed such a good commercial farming system that we can just throw it out. So one thing that my family really likes to do is upcycle fruits and vegetables that are kind of past their prime. And one thing that my mom and I did over the weekend was we actually baked some banana bread. So we had some bananas that were overly ripened, and we just mashed them up, put them in some bread, so on and so forth, and baked that. And that was a really good snack. Otherwise, we would have just thrown those bananas away, but they could still be eaten. So really, to all of the viewers out there, just kind of think about like what you're throwing away. I know that I've seen a lot of other specials, like documentaries, so on and so forth, that they talk about that you have a best buy date, and then you have or you have a sell by date, a best buy date, and then an expiration date. And those are really different. The sell by date just basically means that you have to get it off the store shelves, but that doesn't mean it's bad. And the best buy date, it might not be as fresh as you'd want it to be, but that can still be edible. And really the best judge of that is just by smelling the food. And I don't want to encourage you to eat expired food if it's obviously bad. Like be careful, obviously. But what I'm saying is that if it's a few days before its best by date, that probably doesn't mean it. You just have to throw out the food because that happens just too much in our society.
I totally agree with you, Johnny. And if I may add, I think that something that we're seeing, especially right now, in modern cities, like for example, California, I know that I recently saw an advertisement of this zero waste store where you basically go in with your glass containers and they weigh them, like they weigh before you put anything into it, and then you pour in the products that are already set, and then they charge based upon the product that you chose and how much you put into your container. And I feel like these kind of new concepts are basically emerging from the desire to not only tackle the issue of how to manage waste, but to tackle the issue of how not to generate waste in the first place. And I think that's an important topic to talk about, because I think there's many ways to avoid waste. And the first thing that we should look at, I feel, is on things that we buy constantly, like food. So I think that's why these supermarkets are having so much success lately. And I feel like it's a good topic to address.
One of the other things that a lot of people don't touch on is soil degradation. I know in environmental systems and societies, we started talking about that, and how our soil is being depleted of all its natural minerals. So all these crops that we're growing don't necessarily have the minerals that we think they should have, because those minerals are no longer found in our soils. So we see more people becoming deficient in basic like vitamin D, vitamin A, and phosphorus. So people are having to take more supplemental vitamins than we used to 20 years ago, because our bodies are not having those key elements, and therefore our bodies are not working as properly as they should. What we have seen an increase is in vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D is one of those things that we should be able to absorb from the sunlight, but there's fairly new research that is suggesting that we don't necessarily absorb as much sunlight as we actually think that we do. Otherwise, we wouldn't have people that are deficient in vitamin D. So we need to be cautious about what we're planting, how we're planting it, rotating crops in certain areas to be able to introduce those key elements back into the soil. The other thing that we need to conserve, of course, is our food, because are we going to be able to supply the food for the entire world? We have about approximately, 90 billion people. Are we going to be able to feed ourselves? Now, I know I've asked a lot of students how they feel about this week, Earth Day, conserving, recycling also, all those things. And I know a lot of people have said, it's like, well, it doesn't really affect me right now. Maybe when I'm older, I'll think about it. But right now, I don't think about it at all. Well, you have to think, in 20 years, it might be too late for you. In 50 years, heck, I'm not going to know what's going on. I'm going to be over the hill already. So you guys are the ones that are going to be in our position. And you're going to have to come up with these solutions on how you're going to save the earth. You have to think about now what your value system is. That's the one thing that we've talked about in environmental systems, is we have three types of environmental value systems. We have the ecocentric, the anthropocentric, and the technocentric value system. Ecocentric, you put Earth and everything else, the ecosystem around you first. Anthropocentric is where a person values their own, the human mankind first, beyond anything else. And the technocentric is when you value technology and you're going to depend on technology to solve all of our issues. I don't think there's a one thing that's going to solve all of our problems. I think it's a combination of everything that everybody needs to contribute. Yes, we can use technology to solve some of our issues, but we have to be held responsible for our own actions on a daily basis.
Exactly. And I think that everyone here is going to have differing opinions about like what we need to do to fix it and what we should be doing in the present. Like some of you might be like very, very deep ecologists, as we'd call it, very deep ecocentrists, where you believe that, you know, maybe we should just stop using power, maybe we should just stop driving, so on and so forth. A lot of us probably believe that, yes, there is change that needs to be done. We need to reduce littering. We need to try to use more sustainable materials. But I think that if you're in the audience and at least at the beginning of the show, you believed that like there's nothing that we can do, or there's nothing that we should do, that we should just keep on going on the way that we are. I hope that these conversations have really kind of started to change your mind, because I at least believe that everyone should probably fall somewhere in some extent of an ecocentric, because if not, then our planet isn't going to be able to sustain us in probably 100 years. Who knows? So that's about it for this topic. We have some actually, before we end, anything else that anyone wants to add before we move to the questions?
I also have a little garden that I agree with you, but composting is also very good. And I was born and raised like planting, that's how I know. And I thought it was normal to just grow your own food. But like for the food waste, I found out that make a shopping list when you go to the store is one of the most important thing, because you're not wasting and you're not overbuying food that you're not going to use anyways. And then from shopping, you need to store them properly also for you not to waste the food, because yeah, you have these fruits and vegetable, but if you're not in storing them properly, then you're also putting that to waste.
Exactly. Anyone else?
Well, and I think that's something that we had also discussed with Miss Marin about choosing the right products in the supermarket. we had talked about how it's not only healthier, but if we switch to a more plant-based diet and a diet with more wholesome products like fruits and vegetables, that can also contribute to us generating less waste because we're not consuming so much products in these containers and plastic bags and whatnot. So I think also being mindful of what we do purchase in supermarkets, because I know that's not everyone can manage to take care of a garden, but I know that a lot of people can choose what products they buy at the supermarket. So I think that that's also a great solution for many people.
And I think another solution, and we did this yesterday, you know, the Meatless Monday, trying to reduce the meat consumption. Also, even seafood. I know I was talking to Johnny about this, about the Seaspiracy documentary on Netflix. And there were some really scary statistics that in a few years, you know, and Johnny was telling me about how some fishes were almost close to being extinct because of the fishing kind of elements that they'd use. And so I think just even by what we did yesterday, you know, reducing the consumption of meat, we're helping the environment and we're trying to reduce that carbon footprint that, you know, having all these massive amounts of animals for the meat consumption cost to the earth. And so I think we're, you know, we've taken some measures to do that, just even starting this week.
All right. So our first question is from Mrs. Allen Smith. She asks, how is illegal dumping in the RGV directly related to the major flooding caused from the last hurricane? So anyone want to have a shot at that?
I'll take that one. Some of the illegal dumping that's taking place is actually blocking our ditches where the waterway is supposed to, or the water's supposed to make its way through. So that blocks it. And also, we haven't updated our ditches in the Rio Grande Valley in an extremely long time. So there's a lot of other factors that also contribute to the flooding, but the illegal dumping for sure is blocking the water and not allowing all the water to flow down into the coastline the way it's supposed to.
All right. Next question is from Ms. Vella. She asks, can you mention some positive actions and or effects that people are taking to help our planet? I actually want to add something really quickly about that. You guys may or may not know about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDS. And I believe they started them around in the 1990s, and then around 2015, they refreshed them. And that first round of sustainable development actually saw a lot of positive impact, specifically with like global hunger. There were 216 million fewer people hungry in, I believe, around 2015 compared to the 1990 to 92 year range. So we are making some positive progress already. But
And something interesting that I was talking to Johnny about this was that over the summer I did a summer program, and we actually learned that educating girls can actually be the answer to sustainable development. And what I found, I have it right here, what I found is that it can lead to climate action, to clean water and sanitation, to clean and affordable energy, and also for responsible consumption and production, and improving life below water and on land. So that's something really interesting. You know, we should promote that too, that I found.
all right, our next question is from Aaron Nino. He asks, what would be some vegetables that could be grown considering the weather and dry heat in this region, and specifically vegetables and or fruits? I know I've had some. Oh wait, go on.
I have some zucchini squash that survived after the freeze. Spinach also, I always have them from seeds, but they survived also from the freeze for some reason. The peppers that we have here, the different types of peppers also survived in our region.
Nice. I know like all of my banana peppers died, unfortunately. I think that maybe if we would have covered them a bit better, like we didn't really, we got our stuff covered, but I don't think that we did it like well enough.
I also know that some citrus fruits like oranges and lemons can also survive. But I only have had experience with an orange tree, so I can't really provide much feedback, but I know that fruits are great to grow here.
And I know that they're supposed to survive, but I did see just even around here in the RGV that a lot of them did not survive. The citrus groves, and my grandpa actually asked them, and a lot of them actually did not survive either. And it's very close to the RGV. But I do agree with Julia. So
All right. One of our final questions is from Miss Fella, and this is directed to Miss Luna. Do you know any regenerative farms in the Rio Grande Valley?
The only one that I can think of is Eagle Patcher Farms in Harlingen. They actually grow or have grass-fed cattle. And beyond that, I don't know any other.
All right. And I think this was a really good point made in chat. Planting a garden does not take a lot of time. On the other hand, I believe it is just a matter of educating us the best way to plant our own garden. And it can even be relaxing. Like I always, after school, I always go out, water the garden, and take a walk around the backyard. Like it's it's being nice to release some stress after school and also get a little bit of exercise in. So I honestly encourage everyone to try it. Even if it's just planting a little seed in a little pot, you don't have to invest a lot of money before you start to grow a garden also. Sophia Trevino asks, how could major corporations change to help reduce the carbon footprint? I'm assuming of like major shipping organizations, especially I think even like the travel industry. Anyone want to have a shot at that?
Well, I think one of the ways to manage that is through ethical sourcing. I know that I've heard that many companies have started to obtain their products through companies that are sustainable, and I think that that's also a great way to push forward those companies that might be that they might be incipient companies that are beginning to grow. And I think it's also a great way that companies can contribute to taking care of the planet.
and there's also some companies and businesses that are targeted to being sustainable. So you can always look out for that, but also look out for them to not just be greenwashing and for them to actually be ethically sourcing. So
And the Gateway to the World Library account mentioned in chat that it's important to support certified B corporations, and I've actually not heard of them. She explained that they consider the impact of their decisions on workers, customers, suppliers, community, and the environment. So, yeah, definitely look into that. And it's kind of an ethical dilemma when it comes to like mass production. Not only the impact it has on the environment, but also the impact it has on people. Like if you think about how an iPad or an iPhone is made, it requires a lot of shipping. That's a lot of carbon footprint. That's a lot of carbon that is released into the atmosphere. But you also have kind of some unethical labor practices in countries that don't have the same laws as the United States, like China, and the way that they like work their workers and they hardly pay them anything. And also some mines in like Central America, like I've heard of some atrocious things. And we kind of just ignore that as a society and as a consumer. We're just like, yeah, we get the new cool iPad. It's awesome. But we don't think about how much goes into it and how much blood, sweat, and tears is released just from producing that one product.
Johnny, and you mentioned you were specifically talking about technology, but also in the clothing department, even a pair of jeans is going to take so much water consumption, not even to just create it and to ship and to put it in stores, but for the amount of time that you have that pair of jeans. And also just fast fashion in general. And I know there's a lot of like other clothing brands that are sustainable. However, fast fashion is very accessible. And so I think that's the issue. Sometimes finding those brands and those products that are sustainable. And so we should always try to look for those other options that are eco-friendly.
Definitely. All right, it is about time for us to go. Let's just quickly address one more question from Ms. Pettis. Would you recommend solar panels as an energy source? Yes or no? I'd say definitely. It's a lot, a lot better than burning carbon and in factories and burning coal mining. Can you name a type of farm? I'll get back to you, Mrs. Allen Smith. So let's wrap it on up. Thank you so much for asking your questions in chat. You had some awesome things to say, a lot of support in the chat also. And I think we had a really interesting discussion with you guys. Any last words before we sign out?
I want to thank all of you guys, the students, Mariana, Juliana, Johnny. You guys did an excellent job. You guys are doing great. Thank you for everything.
Thank you so much. And remember to keep participating for all our full week events that we're going to be having.
Yes, and make your virtual biomes also, guys. I made a video tutorial on how to use the virtual biome software. We want to see your creations, and also make sure to tune into the live stream Thursday. We are not sure on the time exactly yet, but it's looking like it'll either be at noon or after the Thursday Lion Talks, which is scheduled for 3 p.m. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you all so much for watching this live stream. I hope that we opened your minds up to the damage that we are doing to our earth and some of the things that we can do to help that, even if we're just one individual. So thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Keep participating.
Thank you.
Bye.
Don't forget to hashtag Go Green with World Scholars.
Hashtag Go Green with World Scholars. All right.
Are we still live?
I think we might be still live.
Yeah, because I see it on there.
I think that we have to actually end the Zoom meeting. So thank you all so much. Great discussion.
Bye, everyone.
I'll talk to you all later. Bye.